My cousin was the golden boy, while I was the family's joke. At the reunion, my aunt gushed about his job. I said, "I just signed his paycheck." Have you ever had a family gathering when you could sense the setup coming? As if you've been welcomed for more than simply love or to reunite. No, you've been summoned for a performance under the limelight. Except you've merely been cast as a background figure who applauds someone else's triumph. That was me, Ethan. I'm 32. And this narrative begins with a text from my mother that simply read, "Please come this time. Everyone wants to see you." I hadn't been to a family event in 4 years. Not because I am bitter or theatrical. Okay, maybe a bit, but primarily because they never felt like family. Every event seemed like a comparison game. Who purchased a house? Who became engaged? Who had a child? Who has a new job? And every now and then, someone, typically my Aunt Sandra, would make a joke about how I was still looking for myself. Like if I were a lost sock, I maintained my distance after a while. I built my own stuff quietly. No Facebook postings, no updates, and no drama. But this time, something in my mother's voice and my curiosity compelled me to say yes. For the previous 7 years, I had been growing my firm. It began as a specialist hiring site for engineers. We then shifted our focus to developing corporate hiring solutions. 7 months ago, we obtained Clean Exit, the kind that changes everything. But I kept it secret. My name was not in the headlines, and I enjoyed that I was not showy. I like being underestimated. The reunion was scheduled on Saturday. The same spot as always. My uncle's obnoxiously enormous house, with the circular driveway, 3 SUVs in front, and that strange iron eagle above the garage, as if he was running some kind of secret organization. I drove up in my Tesla. No one seemed to notice or care. They were too busy swarming Zach. Let me tell you about my cousin Zach. He's 28, blonde, has a wide smile, and exudes enthusiasm in his varsity jacket. He's the golden boy. Straight A's in high school, a business degree, and summer internships at major corporations. The traditional LinkedIn warrior, the family adored him, and evidently, today was his coronation. Sandra grabbed my wrist the second I stepped in. "Ethan, oh my God, you're here. Come say hello to Zach. He just got hired at Nexra." I recognized the name. A finance company that just raised funds. Some showy headlines, a high valuation, and unbeknownst to Aunt Sandra, one of the firms that my firm now technically controls. Not directly, but rather through our new parent company's umbrella. I blinked. "Oh wow," I replied, smiling. "That's exciting." She leaned in and whispered as if we were exchanging gossip, yet her voice carried far enough to be heard by the next zip code. "He's going to be a millionaire before he's 30. He's just so brilliant." Then came the big reveal. "Unlike some people," she said, letting the last bit linger like a cheap insult she hoped I wouldn't notice. I smiled again, not because I wasn't irritated, but because this was precisely why I came. Zach was in the middle of the backyard, surrounded by lawn chairs, lemonade and adulation. He was discussing stock options as if he'd found them himself. A tiny group of cousins and uncles nodded like disciples. "It's pre-IPO, so yeah, there's risk, but I'm not worried. We're scaling fast. The CEO knows me by name." I stood at the periphery of the group, hands in my pockets, simply observing. That's when grandmother posed the unavoidable question. "So, Ethan, honey, what are you up to these days?" The loudness dropped, not completely silent, but enough for me to feel a dozen heads tilt toward me like sunflowers seeking sunlight. I pondered, providing my customary ambiguous response. "Oh, you know, work's been good, busy." But today seemed different. I was not here to brag. I was here to remind them that I exist outside of their assumptions. "Not much," I said, sipping my drink. "I just signed Zach's paycheck last week." It was quiet. Similar to true quiet. I've never heard so many jaws shut at once. Even Zach blinked, as if he didn't grasp what he had just heard. Aunt Sandra's grin twitched. And that's when Grandpa, who's 85, hard of hearing, and normally half sleeping, jumped up from his lawn chair, leaned on his cane and exclaimed, "Wait a damn minute." But first, let me back up a bit because this wasn't simply a snappy response. It had been 7 years in the making. And it all began with a college dropout, a rundown apartment above a laundry, and a family that believed I was squandering my life. Everyone thought I was insane when I dropped out of college at the age of 23. My father stopped talking to me for a month. My mother sobbed. Aunt Sandra informed everyone that I would definitely finish up delivering food or establishing a band. I didn't care. I had a concept, and I wanted to construct it. Not for clout or accolades, but simply for myself. However, that choice cost me more than simply their favor. And as I stood in that backyard, seeing their arrogant smiles fade to uncertainty, I remembered everything they had said along the road. I remembered the birthday I wasn't invited to because they thought I'd be too busy with my business. I remembered Zach making a joke about my being officially unemployed at Thanksgiving and everyone laughed, even my parents. I remembered every unanswered text, every eye roll, and every forced grin as I tried to explain what I was working on and received nothing but blank eyes. So, no, my response was not about flexing, it was about regaining space. And when Grandpa adjusted his hearing aid and glanced around at the startled audience, I knew the finest part hadn't even begun since they hadn't heard the entire story. Not even close. Grandpa's words broke through the quiet like a rusted saw. "Way too damn minute, you signed his paycheck." He glanced at me, then at Zach. "What does that even mean?" All eyes returned to me, and I could feel the weight of the situation pushing down on my chest like a sandbag. My hand clenched around the drink. I hadn't intended to speak it out like way. It simply slipped. But now that it was suspended in the air, there was no getting it back. Zach uttered a brief, hesitant laugh. "Ha ha ha, right Ethan, that's a good one." He looked around, hoping for someone to join in. Nobody did. I smiled softly. "Yeah, it's a small world, right?" I didn't say anything more. Not yet. Let them stew. Aunt Sandra recovered first. She straightened up taller, pulled down her cardigan, and gave me the tight, dismissive look she usually used when she wanted to reclaim control. "Well, I'm sure that's a fun joke, Ethan. But a part of me, some deeply wounded part, desired more. Not vengeance, exactly. Just balance. An equilibrium was long needed. When I was 23, I moved back home with my parents after depleting my funds. I was working 16-hour days attempting to develop the initial prototype of my platform, hardly sleeping, and delivering groceries at night to pay off my college loans. I recall eating plain rice for dinner for 6 days in a row. You believe I'm exaggerating, but I have images. I used to joke with my one friend that if I ever made it, I'd buy myself a gold-plated rice cooker. The worst thing, however, was not the fight. It was pity. Every meal with my family seemed like an intervention. My mother would suggest things like, "Maybe you should just apply for something stable for now. You can always do your little business later." My father would look at the TV and grumble. My sister Victoria, who was in medical school at the time, would share anecdotes about her residency and how she didn't have time for such diversions. The unsaid message was consistently the same. Ethan is wasting his potential. Ethan needs to grow up. On the day of Victoria's graduation, I overheard my parents discussing in the kitchen. My mother muttered, "I just hope he doesn't embarrass us in front of everyone." I didn't weep that time. I departed soon before the talks began. I stopped turning up after that. I created, studied, and developed in quiet. Back in the backyard, the hum had changed. Zach was still talking, attempting to get people's attention with something about his manager inviting him to a secret Slack channel, but they weren't paying attention as much. The shine had vanished. Now they were gazing at me. For the first time in years, they expressed an interest in hearing me. But before I could say anything more, Aunt Sandra hit again. "You know what I think, Ethan?" she inquired, folding her arms. "I think you're jealous. You came here to cause a scene. You've always hated when someone else gets the spotlight." That stung, not because it was true, but because she said it so simply and publicly, as if I had been a bitter parasite my whole existence. "No," I said quietly. "I came here because Mom asked me to, and because I was hoping, naively, I guess, that maybe this year would be different." She cracked a joke. "Different how? We're just proud of Zach. He earned it. You don't get to come in here after disappearing for years and act like you're above everyone." "I'm not above anyone," I explained. "But I'm not beneath you either." That is when the gloves came off. "Really? Because last I checked, you dropped out of college, lived off your parents, and couldn't even hold a real job. Zach has a career. He's going places. And you? What have you even done that's worth clapping for?" I could feel the back of my neck warm up. I looked at my mother. She was chewing her lip, her gaze flitting between us. My father merely gazed down at his plate. And just when I thought things couldn't get worse, Victoria stepped over. She must have caught the final few sentences. Her expression was unreadable. "You know," she gently added, It wouldn't kill you to be happy for someone else's success. And that was all. Not the words, but the weight behind them. The revelation that despite all of these years and everything I'd accomplished, they still regarded me as the family disappointment, not a self-made entrepreneur. Not the person who turned a failed concept into a multi-million-dollar exit. Not the man who spent late nights studying how to pitch, hire, and survive. Just the dropout, the pity case, and the failure. I walked back to my car and drove away. Without making a scene or storming out, I did not go home. I parked near the old high school field where I used to have lunch alone after leaving soccer. I glanced at the empty bleachers, reflecting on every moment that had brought me here. Every remark, slight, every backhanded compliment. I phoned my old mentor. He picked up on the second ring. "Ethan," he asked, "is everything okay?" I halted. "I think I want to do something petty." He laughed. "Define petty." "I want to invite my entire family to dinner next weekend, and I want to book it at the most expensive restaurant in the city, and I want to pay for everything, but only after they sit through a presentation." He did not hesitate. "Do it." So I did. I waited a few days to let the tension boil. Then I messaged my mother, requesting her assistance in inviting everyone to a dinner to commemorate an important occasion. She didn't ask many questions. All she said was that she was delighted I was attempting to reconnect. I reserved a private room at the city's most luxury restaurant, the sort with gilded menus, valet parking, and a sommelier who makes wine seem like a religion. I pre-ordered everything. Steak, seafood, dessert, and high-end cocktails. I told them to spare no cost. Everyone had RSVP'd. Of course they did. They assumed it was about them. I donned a black suit to dinner and brought printed copies of something I'd been working on for a few days. It was not a presentation. It was not even showy. It was a single page with a diagram outlining our company's organizational structure before and after the purchase. And there, in plain and white, was Nexra listed under our parent brand, with my name at the top, just below the CEO. I arrived at the restaurant early, met each family member as they came, smiled, snapped photos, and listened to Aunt Sandra explain how Zach had been selected for a new client assignment. Then, once everyone had finished their appetizers, I stood. "I just wanted to say a few words," I started. But before I could, Zach, poor, dear Zach, came up and said, "Before you go, I just wanted to thank everyone for their support. This new job is a big deal for me, and I hope to make you all proud." Polite applause. I nodded. "Thanks, Zach. That's actually a great segue." I gave out the pages, saw them read, their eyes expand, Aunt Sandra's jaw droop, and then spoke the line I practiced in the mirror. "You were right, Zach is going places. And lucky for him, one of those places is under my supervision," he grumbles. Forks fell. And just when stillness threatened to absorb the entire room, Grandfather stood up. He didn't say anything at first. Just stared at me, then the paper, and finally at Zach. Grandpa's hand trembled slightly as he placed the paper down. His gaze lingered on me, blue-gray, worn with age, yet sharp when it mattered. The room was hushed, almost respectful, as if we'd all walked into a church, and no one informed the priest he may talk. He turned to Zach, who was transfixed with his champagne glass half lifted, and said slowly, "You work for him?" Zach's neck bobbed. His gaze shifted between me, his mother, and the paper. "No, I mean not directly. He's not in my department. He doesn't oversee me or anything." I didn't say anything. I did not need to. The paper speaks for itself. My name was there. VP of Talent Infrastructure and Strategic Acquisitions. Nexra was one of 5 acquisitions under our branch, represented by the new holding company's emblem directly under the executive board. I'd signed Zach's paycheck. He was technically 3 levels below me, 2 if you considered the dotted line structure. I did not flaunt it. I'd never communicated with him on Slack, but the figures did not deceive. I could have noted his performance assessment, authorized or denied his bonus. I could have allocated his team to a random internal project just for fun, and everyone in the room knew it. Grandpa chuckled and turned to Aunt Sandra. "Well, would you look at that? You were so busy puffing up the boy, you didn't notice the man standing next to him." He turned back at me. "I always knew you had fired Ethan." The old man gave me a nod I hadn't seen since I was a kid attempting to build model trains in his garage. Then he sat down and stabbed his steak with fresh vigor. But the room had not caught up. Not yet. Victoria remained mute, staring down at the page as if it had betrayed her. My father shuffled awkwardly, looking at my mother as if he wanted permission to talk. Aunt Sandra had turned absolutely pale, blinking as if someone had yanked the floor out from beneath her. And Zach, oh Zach, appeared to want to disappear. But I was not gloating. I didn't even feel furious anymore. That phase had come and gone. I felt fatigued more than anything else. And when I sat back down and took a leisurely drink of water, I knew that this was not the end. This was the midpoint. Allow me to take you back for a bit. Back to the section of the tale I skipped at the beginning. The portion that most people do not discuss when they make it, the bit that aches. After leaving Victoria's graduation celebration early, I moved out of my parents' house and into a small apartment above a laundry with a leaking ceiling and paper-thin walls. I worked nights delivering food and days constructing my company, putting together code and clumsy prototypes using tutorials and late-night forums. I had one buddy, David, who believed in the idea and offered to help on weekends for free. The platform's original iteration was prone to frequent crashes. The second was scarcely useful. The third started working. We got our first paid user 15 months ago. A tiny corporation in Ohio charges $99 per month. I burst into tears when I received the Stripe message. Not in delight, but in relief. I was not insane. The night we reached $600 MIPSAR, I purchased 2 paper crowns from Burger King and made David wear one. We toasted with Pepsi and spoke like kings. But growth was modest. Money was tighter than ever. Every dollar received went toward hosting expenses, UX enhancements, and customer support. I did not pay myself for 28 months. My parents were not aware of this. They believed I was a freeloader. My father once inquired if I would ever contribute to society. I nodded and shifted the subject. I didn't attend family events. Didn't respond to texts. I lived in that in-between space. Too broke to enjoy success. Too obstinate to stop. Then came my low point. Year 3. We lost our largest client due to a feature problem. Our turn increased. David's mother became ill, forcing him to walk away. I found myself alone again. I maxed up my last credit card just to keep the lights on. I applied for night shifts in a warehouse to get by. That night I sat in my car outside the warehouse orientation center, holding the steering wheel with white knuckles and wondered why keep going? Why should we suffer? Why not just get a regular job and end this madness? However, something in me, little, silent, and angry, resisted. Perhaps it was pride. Perhaps it was the anxiety of going back to those family meals with nothing to show. Perhaps it was the recollection of Victoria rolling her eyes when I mentioned my notion. Whatever it was, it compelled me to turn the key, drive home, and patch the fault that night. 2 weeks later, we had a phone contact with an angel investor, and everything changed. His name was Robert. He wasn't glamorous. He was a sensible person who loved our concept and saw possibilities. He provided us $50,000 in initial money, which was enough to keep us going and hire one developer part-time. From then, we expanded gradually, then quickly, we signed new clients. Word got around. 2 years later, a venture capital firm made an offer. We responded, bargained, and signed. I moved into an actual apartment. David came back. We assembled a real team. Then followed the acquisition. $13.5 million. No drama, just clean terms. I left with a healthy peace. Not enough to retire permanently, but enough to never have to answer to anybody. Again I remained on for a new position, strategic acquisitions and internal infrastructure. The portion of the work where you get to assist businesses like ours develop smarter, quicker, and better. Nexra is one of the first firms I helped buy. I didn't even realize Zach worked there until I saw his name on a personnel list. Months later I chuckled when I saw it, but I didn't say anything until our reunion. Back at the restaurant, I watched my family eat their meals, too proud to speak and too terrified to pretend nothing had occurred. I made a little toast. Thank you for attending. I thank my parents for rearing me. Thanked David gently. Then I paid the money in full and went out. Not while my chest ballooned up. Not with swagger. Just peace. But peace does not erase the past. The next week, my mother texted me. Can we talk? And I phoned her. She did not apologize immediately. Just asked serious questions about the firm and my life. I told her about the evenings at the laundromat, the rice, the tears and the silence. She didn't say much, simply listened. I believe that pained her more than anything I could have said. That was something she had not known, that I had not told her. She had no notion I was drowning despite the fact that we lived together. She cried. I nearly did. Victoria wrote me an email. Long, formal, and apologetic. She said she admired me, even if she hadn't expressed it. She said she was proud I did not respond straight away. I wasn't upset, I simply wasn't sure I believed her yet. Zach has not contacted us, but I heard via the grapevine that he's keeping his head down at work. Now that news has spread, folks are a little more cautious when they learn the man they used to laugh about is now 3 rungs above them. Aunt Sandra has been silent on Facebook recently. No more bragging postings. No more meek bragging about Zach. Only photographs of her garden and passive-aggressive statements about true success being silent. I grin whenever I see one. But here is the reality: revenge felt amazing at the moment. But peace felt better. Not because they finally noticed me, but because I finally recognized myself. I did not need their adulation, I didn't need the validation. I'd spent so many years trying to show I wasn't a failure that I'd forgotten I wasn't one. And perhaps the true victory wasn't that they knew now, it's not that I needed them to. However, the story is not finished since something more happened after the supper. Something I hadn't expected. Something that would change the entire family dynamic. And this time it's not in my favor. It began with a voicemail. 4 weeks after the meal, I was on a flight returning from Chicago, bleary-eyed and operating on 2 hours of sleep, when I noticed the message: I missed Dad's call. Message time. 1 minute, 23 seconds. We didn't chat much, even after everything. Our relationship floated in a strange limbo where we were courteous but distant, like 2 co-workers who were once close but had lost their rhythm. I played the message while waiting at the luggage carousel. His voice was soft. Too quiet. Hey Ethan. Listen. Something's come up. Nothing urgent. Don't worry. But your grandfather's been asking about you. Wants to see you. I think it's important. He's not saying much, but when he asks twice, I listen. Call me. That was all they said. My stomach constricted slightly. Grandpa had always been bright, but his health wasn't what it once was. He still lived alone. He refused to leave the house he had constructed. Himself. But lately my mother had hinted that he was slowing down. I phoned back the next morning. Ethan, he replied, his voice booming. You finally done playing with airplanes and meetings and all that jazz? It made me giggle. Just landed. What's up? There was a long silence. Then come over tomorrow if you can. There's something I want to show you. His residence hadn't altered. The porch railings are painted in the same fading blue. The identical wind chimes clinked in the gentle air. The same fragrance of coffee and cedar, as well as something subtly therapeutic, lingered on ancient walls and memories. He was waiting for me on the porch, wearing his regular suspenders and a flat cap that made him appear like he had stepped off the set of a 1950s baseball game. You're late, he remarked, even though I arrived 5 minutes early. Nice to see you too, I said. He simply waved me in without saying anything further. Inside, he walked me to his study, which was strewn with equipment, old maps, stacks of yellowed newspaper clippings, and a locked cabinet that hadn't been opened in decades. He sat carefully in his aged leather chair, gesturing to the other seat. He then unlocked the cabinet, took out a manila packet and handed it to me. Inside were a dozen ancient documents, including property titles, tax applications, letters, and a wrinkled photo of a lake cottage from my boyhood. My eyes skimmed the first page, perplexed. I don't understand, I said. What is this? That, Grandpa explained slowly, is everything the family is unaware of. I looked up. He leaned back and rested both hands on his cane. That lake house, it's been in the family since the 1970s. Your grandmother and I bought it before any of your uncles got married. I never told anyone it was under my name only. Figured it'd be less of a fight when I died. I started reading property titles, dated signatures, and my name on a handful of them, dated within the previous year. You transferred these to me. He nodded. Started the paperwork months ago. Made it official last week. I hadn't noticed. Why me? Another silence. He looked at me with an unusual intensity, as if he was trying to see through my skin and into my bones. Because you showed me something they didn't. Grit. Fire. You earned everything you've got. They, your father, Sandra, Victoria, the rest. They all think success is owed to them because they check the right boxes. Good grades, good schools, the right job titles. He turned toward me. But you built and then you showed grace. You didn't rub it in their faces. Even when you had the right to. I had no idea what to say, so I said nothing. He kept going. Quieter now. They think I'm leaving it all to your dad. Sandra thinks Zach's getting a share. But the truth is, I've watched how they treat people when they think they're above them, and I've watched how you stayed humble when you didn't have to. He tapped the file cabinet. You're the executive now. You hold the key. And when the time comes, it's your call. What happens next? My heart quickened. Does anyone else know? He said, smiling. Nope. That's the fun part. I left his house feeling as if someone had handed me a loaded weapon and ordered me to use it carefully. I did not ask for this. I didn't want it at first. But the more I thought about it, about the lake home, the accounts, and the forgotten shares in an old family firm that still generated a modest but consistent income, the more I recognized what I'd been given. Leverage. Suddenly, memories began to arise. For example, Victoria laughed in my face when I asked her to review a contract in the early days of the firm. I'm a doctor, not a magician, she'd said. Or Sandra told my mother behind my back that I was a hopeless case and that they should prepare for when I returned. Or Zach boasting at a wedding that some individuals think startups are a quick way to get money but don't understand the real world. I recalled everything, and now I grasped the strings. Over the next few weeks, I started to plan. Not out of hate or vengeance, but because I sought clarity, justice, and, perhaps a spectacle. First, I contacted my lawyer, who reviewed every document Grandpa handed me, validated the transfers, filed the silent paperwork to complete a few outstanding deeds, established safeguards, and watched as the legal authority changed in my name piece by bit. Then I looked in the old business record for a firm named Pinarove Utility LLC, which the family had forgotten about after selling it off in the late 2000s. But someone had retained a minority ownership. That person was Grandpa. And the 8% share is now mine. And that 8% had a new customer knocking on their door, $300,000. I signed the paperwork. Suddenly I had liquid cash and legal ownership over 3 plots of property, 1 cabin, and a family trust account that they had no idea existed. The irony. The whole family assumed Grandpa was forgetful and needed assistance handling his affairs. They were already hovering like vultures, anticipating that when he died, they'd share the scraps. They had no notion that the will had already altered. They had no notion that I was the executive. They had no idea I now had the passwords to every account he had ever used. I waited until Thanksgiving. This time, the meal was held at Sandra's place. It was the typical circus. Roast turkey, polite insults, and theatrical laughs. Zach remained silent than usual. He kept his head down. I saw him staring at me now and then, as if he wasn't sure whether he was supposed to be upset or impressed. Victoria had brought up her new boyfriend, a surgeon. She introduced him 3 times, as if we hadn't heard her the previous 2. Sandra was in full hostess gear. This turkey is from that specialty farm near the vineyard, nothing frozen here, she told me. And we only use ceramic knives now. Better for the environment. I giggled. Said nothing. Let her speak. Allow them all to talk. Then, when dessert was presented, I clinked my glass. Hey everyone, I said as I stood up. Can I have just 5 minutes? They all turned. Even Grandpa glanced up from his pumpkin pie. I brought out a little black folder and carefully placed it on the table. This, I replied, is the updated deed to the lake house. Sandra blinked. The lake house. It's in my name now, I responded quietly. Grandpa transferred it last month, along with a few other assets. You could hear the blood drain from their faces. Victoria frowned. What are you talking about? I opened the folder containing the notarized paper and flipped it around for all to see. Aunt Sandra became rigid. That has to be a mistake. That property belongs to the family, to us. Grandpa cleared his throat. I am the family, he explained. And I made my choice. I paused for a moment before continuing. I'm not doing anything with it right now, but I will be restructuring a few things, which means if anyone had plans to use the house next summer without permission, they might want to rethink that. Victoria's partner began making excuses. Zach looked like he had swallowed a spoon. Sandra rose abruptly. This is insane. This is manipulation. You convinced an old man to sign over our family's property. No, Grandpa said. I gave it to someone who earned it, but I also made him executive. Grandpa said, when I pass, Ethan will have the final say on everything. The stillness that followed was unlike the supper silence. This one was hefty, nasty, and final. But I wasn't finished yet, since this wasn't simply about property or money. This was about the truth. And it was time to show them what truth looked like when it entered the room carrying a folder and a plan. And that's when I dropped the last envelope on the table. Sandra's name is printed on the front and side. Something she hadn't seen coming. Something she should have remembered. She made a mistake years ago and I had the receipts. But let us not get ahead of ourselves. Because as she opened the package, her expression altered. That's when everything really started to disintegrate. Sandra's fingers shook as she removed the paper from the envelope. She unfurled it with the care of someone who was aware they were handling something harmful. Her eyes skimmed the page, quickening as her breath hitched. By the time she reached the signature at the bottom, her face had become totally motionless, expressionless, yet pallid in a way that revealed everything. I didn't say anything. I wanted her to speak first. "Where did you get this?" she eventually said, grasping the paper somewhat too firmly. "It was in one of Grandpa's old files," I explained gently, "with the rest of the trust documents." "You went through his private things," she yelled, raising her voice an octave. "Desperate now, you manipulated him. You must have. He would never give you this. You've always hated me." "Stop," Grandpa whispered quietly but firmly. "He didn't manipulate anything. I gave it to him." The chamber fell silent again, but this time it vibrated beneath the surface, like if the air was about to shatter. Victoria leaned over to look at the document in Sandra's hands. "What is it?" I asked Victoria, turning slowly and almost dramatically. "A promissory note," I explained. "Signed by Aunt Sandra 25 years ago for a $40,000 loan that Grandpa gave her and Uncle Ron when they wanted to start that landscaping business, the one that failed after a year." Sandra's eyes widened. "He said it was a gift. We were family, and it was. He said not to worry about it." Grandpa shook his head. "I corrected you. Don't worry about paying it yet. I never forgave that debt. I just waited to see if you'd bring it up. You never did." She stammered now, wrath and terror clashing in her gaze. "That was 20 years ago. It's irrelevant now. And anyway, any lawyer would say the statute of limitations." "It's not about suing you," I explained, folding my hands neatly in my lap. "It's about family and justice. You've spent decades treating everyone as if they were beneath you, boasting about your wealth and making disparaging remarks about other people's occupations and choices. My mother, father and I, and the entire time you never considered the assistance you received to get started." Victoria spoke out cautiously. "Okay, but that was a long time ago, Ethan. Why bring this up now?" "Because," I replied, turning my face toward the crowd. "This family has spent years rewarding arrogance and punishing humility. I watched all of you treat me like I was broken just because I didn't follow the same path you did. You mocked me for building something from scratch. You belittled me when I was at my lowest. You ignored me unless you needed something to gossip about. And now, I stopped, letting the tension build. Now I'm the one holding the keys to the property, to the accounts, to this family's legacy." Sandra stood up. "You're just doing this for revenge. You always were jealous of Zach, of Victoria." I cocked my head. "You keep saying that word, jealous. But let's be honest. What exactly is it you think I'm jealous of?" No one responded. So I continued going. "Victoria's success. She earned that. I respect her. Even if she's cold sometimes, at least she works for what she has." Victoria tensed but did not interrupt. "Zach, I was never jealous of him. But you made sure the entire family believed I should be. Every dinner, every party, you made him the star and made me the cautionary tale. You created a narrative and fed it until it became gospel. Well, guess what? The story changed." Grandpa laughed quietly. I turned back to Sandra. "You owe $40,000. I don't need the money, but I do want a statement. A signed letter acknowledging the loan, the terms, and that you misrepresented it as a gift to avoid repayment." She scoffed. "You're joking." I selected another sheet from the folder. "I've drafted it for you." "You can't make me sign that." "No," was my response. "But if you don't, I'll file it with Grandpa's full estate records, and then you'll be in violation of a promissory agreement under the terms of the updated trust, which gives me the right to legally bar you from inheritance distribution for failure to acknowledge debts to the trust originator." Sandra began to speak, but there was no sound. Zach appeared to be seeing a live automobile wreck and wasn't sure which side of the windshield he was on. Victoria sat very motionless, her eyes fixed on me, no longer furious, but intrigued. For once, I'm truly listening. I turned to face the gathering and made it plain that this is not about punishing her, but about accountability. I was labeled a failure for years. I was cut out of birthday celebrations, insulted during reunions, and criticized for not following the same chronology as everyone else. Now that I'm successful, you want me to pretend nothing happened. I shake my head. I will not. I am not asking for acclaim, but for honesty. So this is how it will proceed. I looked each one in the eyes. 1. If you want entrance to the lake home, you must go via me. 2. I will revise the family trust rules to restrict access to discretionary cash and create contribution-based equity for future usage of any shared properties. 3. No more backdoor dealings. No more. He spoke, and she spoke. I will put up quarterly reporting for any pooled assets. Complete transparency. I looked at Victoria. You're a doctor. You understand systems. If you want to help me manage this as co-executive, I'd welcome it, but not as a favor to me, as an act of atonement. She gave a little nod. I'd be okay with that. 4. Zach. He glanced up, startled, as if I had called on him in class. You don't owe me anything, but we're in the same company now. If you ever want to talk about your role or your growth or how to actually succeed in the startup world, my door's open, but I'm not protecting you. If you slack off, you'll be fired like anyone else. Earn your place. He hesitantly nodded. He was thankful. I turned back to Sandra and replied. 5. You have until the end of the weekend to sign that letter, or your name will be removed from the list. She glanced at me before gently sitting down. She didn't say anything for the rest of the night. The consequences were not immediate. It trickled in during the next weeks. First came the apologies texts from Victoria, my mother, and even cousins who hadn't spoken to me in years. Everyone was instantly thoughtful, interested in my experience, and curious about what I had gone through. I reacted respectfully but not always warmly. Some bridges, once burnt, do not require repair. Zach began showing up for work sooner. I saw his slack behavior. I saw that he was asking better questions. He was attempting to change in his own manner, which I admired. A month later, Victoria invited me to a hospital benefit where she would be speaking. I went. She described me as my smart brother who created something from nothing when no one believed in him. It wasn't a performance. It was genuine. That night we focused on the future rather than the past. We were no longer best friends, but we were finally headed in the same direction. Sandra signed the letter finally, but she hasn't contacted me since. I'm fine with it. She no longer controls the story. As for me, I continue to operate my division at the firm, invest in small companies, live in the same apartment, and drive the same Tesla. But now I visit the lake home and fix it up. I spend weekends there, either alone or with people I care about. I constructed a fire pit out back, installed a new dock, and planted trees. Peaceful and serene, with no tension, comparisons, or commotion. Just me, the river, and the crackling of the fire. It is not about money. It never was. It is about understanding who you are when no one is cheering for you, and knowing who they are once the applauding ends. That is the actual inheritance. Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more shocking real-life stories happening around you.